Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this episode of Youth Ignited with me, Yaseen Kippie. So for the past few episodes we've been focusing on the nature of Islam and the nature of the modern world. With regards to Islam, how does Islam apply universally? Not just that it applies universally, but also an understanding of the nature of the modern world, because we need to understand both the text and the context in order to provide those necessary Islamic responses that the youth are so earnestly seeking today. We focused on the Hadith Jibreel, as you know, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan, what is, the madhabs and all of these, new ways to understand our Deen, but also Aqidah and its social relevance. Today we'll be focusing on women in Islam, really a big topic in discussion both within the Muslim community but also in the globalized society that we live in today. My guest today is Ibtisam Ahmed, and we'll be speaking about that later. But just to introduce this topic, when we speak about gender arguments, gender is a huge issue, both inside religion and also in the West. The nature of our understanding of that needs to be objective and also from a perspective that doesn't create a competition in a way that's unfair. If you look at the current competition that we have between the genders, it's in the outward, and that's why you found so many injuries, sport-related injuries in the Olympics with regards to women in rough sports, because the physiology of men and women is different. And we need to understand that. And one of the results of that is that women are actually being affected by that in a way that they've been placed into this competition that there was never meant to be competition in the first place. But what Islam does is that it answers that and says that we aren't trying to create a competition in the outward, but in the inward. And when we look at that, it's in fact women are at an advantage. One of the flaws of thinking in the day and age that we live in is cause and effect. And so people will look at the Muslim world and they'll see the dysfunctionality of Muslim societies in the Middle East, and they will attribute this to Islam. Oh, Islam's oppressive to women. Oh, it's a backward religion. Whereas from a Muslim perspective, looking into the Middle East and all of these things, we understand that it's in fact the abandonment of Islam. It's the fact that these leaders are no longer practicing their religion. And so once we accept the argument of secular modernity that, what we should be doing is looking at the genders in a physically equal manner, then we will see the real inequalities of the Sharia. But once we understand from a religious mind that what we truly are is people of the spirit, then we can actually begin to look at these arguments objectively. My guest today is Ibtisam Ahmed. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what we will be speaking about today, as I've obviously introduced, is women in Islam. So Ibtisam, just as a first question, what do you think the main issues and challenges facing Muslim women, both young and old, today is?
So I think the first thing to just be aware of is the fact that when we talk about issues and challenges facing Muslim women, we can't divorce that from the issues and challenges that are facing the Ummah as a whole. Muslim women are not some kind of isolated sect within Islam and within Islamic communities. And I think where we see a rise in the challenges and the hardships faced by women, we see a direct link to the way the Deen is practiced. As you've said before, that in many of the societies where women are experiencing immense difficulties are places where the Deen has been abandoned. And I think if we look back to the women of Medina, we see that they were free, unique, dynamic beings because the Deen was practiced in its fullness there. So that's just as an opening point. I think in terms of the challenges faced by women, both young and old, it's important to, of course, recognize, acknowledge and understand the difficulties that women face in different parts of the world. For example, in some parts of the world, women have no freedom and they live in fear. In other parts of the world, they are being attacked because they are visibly Muslim, if they're wearing the scarf and so on. But I think that the problem or the big challenge which faces not just Muslim women but all women is the lack of space for women in society. And I'm going to just explore that a little bit, in that on they're essentially two extremes, but it's two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
So on the one hand, we have certain societies where women are literally shut away, locked away, no voice, cannot be heard, shouldn't be seen, and have absolutely, literally no space to move in any kind of society, to share anything of themselves. On the other extreme, we have women in sort of modern Western liberal societies, of which South Africa is a part, that we find women are given all the freedoms and their rights are secured theoretically, but in practice, in order to become successful, they have to become men. They have to take on the qualities that a man has. They have to think like a man. They have to be like a man. So whether you are literally locked away or you're told, stop being irrational, stop being emotional, you're being too soft, it seems that as a woman, you still don't have a space. So the causes may be different, but the result is the same. And I think to me, that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, if we look at the condition that we currently find ourselves in, there's an ignorance towards gender in Islam, not only from the West, but also amongst the Muslim community. And many times it has to do with cultural problems. And so when we look at what the Quranic narrative is, the Quran says, مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ الرِّجَالِ, from amongst the believers are rijal. Now the word rijal doesn't mean male, doesn't mean man. If you look at the root word, it's from rijal, which means to stand on one's 2 feet. The word for male is dhakar, right? And the word for female is nisa. But the word rajul encompasses all of that. And so there are examples min al-mu'min al-rijal from both the men and the women. And if you look at the original word for man in Latin root word, it comes from Germanic word mensch, which means the male and the female. And a woman is a man with a womb, right? And this is the understanding that the lady has something that the man doesn't, which is the womb. And the word for womb in Arabic is rahm, which is mercy, which doesn't mean that the purpose of a woman is to bear children, but it's definitely a strong path to God. The role and the purpose of women are the same that as men, is to know Allah before you die, right? And so an understanding of that will bring us to the question of who are we by our nature as men and women, and how do we neutralize this gender arguments that we see that in the West they're trying to create this competition in the outward, and in Islam there's an ignorance of who we truly are as the basis. What do you think about that?
So I think that firstly I think that in the Western paradigm, where we're moving towards a space that is gender neutral, where gender is sort of a concept that doesn't quite exist or something we should be skeptical of, I think what we do is that we begin to actually deny the fact that modern society is, in a sense, male dominated. Not in a sense, it is male dominated. And what we see, and again, I'm not talking sort of in absolutes, but as a general patterning, men tend to think in a very structured, rigid kind of way, very different to the way that women think. And that is the dominant voice in society. That's the way society is structured. I think that when we deny that these things, that differences exist, we actually are doing ourselves an immense disservice, because we begin to we think the playing fields are equal, and they're not. As Muslims, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created men and women with different qualities, different characteristics. You mentioned, of course, the connection between the Arabic root word for womb and mercy.
Yes.
And that's to me, it's the meanings that are in that are immense. For example, the fact that Allah has given women the gift of being mothers means that women who are mothers have to practice an immense amount of compassion and patience.
Yeah.
And these are things that if you have to be compassionate, if you have to be patient, you are on the road to purification, you are on the road to pleasing Allah. And that's, in a sense, it's almost built in to what you have. And when we talk about arguments of, oh no, but that it must all be the same, we actually are losing out. I think women are losing out in not taking up certain qualities within us, and not taking it forward. The softness, the tenderness,
absolutely,
the ability to see beauty in the world, to reflect on beauty in the world. That's something that women have. There's an inherent flexibility that women have as well, and I think that's to do with, again, the way we created our nature, the fact that our bodies go through changes all the time, and that means that we are, in a sense, we have a greater understanding of the natural world, And that is a complete antidote to the modern, rigid, everything is in categories, everything is by methodology, that leaves no room for any kind of spontaneity. And of course, as Muslims, we know that nothing can be determined by man, because Allah can change anything in an instant.
Yeah. I mean that's perfect, because I've been focusing on the fiqh and aqidah, but this is really the spiritual aspect of Islam. And if you look at one of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لا يكرمهن إلا كريم ولا يهينهن إلا هنين, that only honorable men honor women and only wretched men dishonor women. And so it's the idea that if men are to adopt the qualities innate in women, which they so easily have, the ability to cry more easily, to have mercy, then we will become a society that actually uplifts. And we will look at the history of also women in Islam with regards to the development of scholarship, not only amongst women but amongst men as well, and how we actually come to that. And we're speaking to Ibtisam Ahmed, who is a graduate in law from the University of Cape Town. She's also a lecturer at the Lady Aisha College on the history of women. We'll be right back.